Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our ongoing Virtual Connect series from AIA Colorado. This time with a twist, we are co-hosting and co-presenting with the National Organization of Minority Architects, their brand new chapter, almost celebrating a one-year anniversary this year from Noma, Colorado. And today's topic is on J.E.D.I resources to create meaningful change. I'm going to be joined today by David Allen, who's an architectural designer at Roland & Broughton Architecture and a member of Noma, Colorado. He's back by popular demand, having just presented the first in this series. Now, with issues of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion at the forefront of current events and in our communities, this cultural moment demands change in the industry. Particularly over the last year and a half, we have a new realization of the need to seek authentic ways to turn words and promises into action and change. If you're here today, hopefully you are on board with the why of how this is important to you and to your spheres of influence and where you work. Now we want to get deeper into the specifics of the what. Working together, the AIA Colorado Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee and Noma, Colorado members have assembled an outstanding panel of architects and change management professionals from across the country, both near and far, who will share their experience with J.E.D.I resources. And we know that at the end of this call, you can use them as a champion or ally, regardless of your career stage or firm position. So there's something we hope for everyone to take and turn into action. During this webinar, I encourage you to use the Q&A box or the chat to ask questions. And I remind AIA members they will earn one AIA CES Learning Unit for participating in today's hour-and-a-half webinar. We will have presenters first, and we'll be taking questions throughout in the feeds, but we'll try and save those till the end so we can get them all at the same time and allow every presenter to address them as they see fit. So without further ado, I'd ask all of our panelists who are assembled from various points around the globe to turn their cameras and microphones on and be welcomed by your moderator, David Allen. Take it away, David.
Thank you, Mike, for that lovely introduction and intro into our session today. So I will start by introducing our speakers and panelists today, and I will give them a chance to kind of speak to their background and say who they are. So first up, we're going to have Mary Margaret Zendra. How about you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much, David. I'm thrilled to join you all. I am the Executive Vice President and Executive Director of AIA Minnesota and our three local chapters here in Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Northern Minnesota, and our foundation. And my interest and work in this topic, in this realm of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice goes back actually about 20 years working with cities to help create welcoming and inclusive communities for new immigrants. And that's really, that work has expanded and grown over time. I've been with AIA Minnesota for about 6 years. And the entire time that I've been here, this has been a priority for our work. So I'm excited to learn from this group and to share with you some of the things that we've learned along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Margaret. And next up, we have Kevin Holland. Take it away, Kevin.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to present. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm a native of Wilmington, Delaware. I now live in the beautiful city of Los Angeles. So I need to apologize now. I live in downtown LA. And so every now and then, it's not unusual to hear an emergency vehicle or coming up the street. But nevertheless, I've been practicing in architecture for about 28 to 30 years. I'm the past national president of the National Organization of Minority Architects. And I think this is a discussion that is certainly worthy of our time. And I'm honored to be on this panel with these esteemed colleagues. Thank you.
Honored to have you. Next up, we have Abby Tortilla.
Thanks, David. So I'm a senior associate and a project manager and architect with Quin Evans out of Washington, D.C. office. And my reason, or what's really brought me to this conversation is along with pushing for that diversity and inclusion within the architecture profession, I'm also active in a group called Reparations Roundtable outside of my work hours, and that's a Black-led organization that moves white folks to action and allyship through paying reparations, financial and supporting folks that are of marginalized gender throughout the country. And that really focusing on that and working with individuals and seeing the needs and working on getting people housed and those sort of things has really made me want to make sure I'm thinking about how we can move that work, not just in my personal spheres, but in the professional sphere as well.
Thank you, Abby. And our fourth panelist for today will be Lauren Mullock.
Thanks, David. So, hi, everyone. I am the head of people operations for a small consulting company called Thought Ensemble. I am based in Texas, but our company is actually headquartered in Denver, Colorado. So we have a split workforce between Dallas and Denver. And I'm honored to be a part of this panel today. I want to hear what others are doing around DEI, but I also want to share what we're doing so that we can help make an impact as well. It takes each of us and every one of us to create change. And there are so many ways we can all be a part of that movement towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I feel lucky to be part of an organization where DEI and belongingness has always been top of mind. It's embedded in everything we do. It's a strategic initiative for us. But I imagine that many of you who are here today are wanting to create meaningful change for your orgs as well. And I hope that today's conversation will give you the tools and resources or some ideas to help you with those efforts.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you to all our panelists. And Mike, would you like to take it away? Maybe get some poll questions started.
Yeah, so you'll hear from me from time to time as we transition between topic areas on poll questions. So first, to get everybody started, we want to know who's in the room today, the virtual room today. We've got some questions here for you to fill out. We will give you time to fill those questions in, and then we'll share them at the end of this segment. So go ahead and complete that poll. Okay, David, while people are doing that, let's get right into it.
All right, thank you, Mike. So to start off today's discussion, we really want to break this down into 3 topics. And our first topic today is going to be, where do we stand? Where can we take inventory and how do we take inventory of, where do we stand today with J.E.D.I issues and address some of these obstacles and how can we progress with that? So today I'm going to ask a series of questions and I will direct them to each panelist as we go forward. So my first question I want to ask today, I'm going to send this over to Kevin. So Kevin, how can we get firm leaders engaged and use the resources available to them? And in what ways can we find importance? Can our firm leaders find importance in the personalized engagement of their work?
Thank you, David. That's a great question. Let's see, the real question is, how do we get firm leaders to engage in creating equitable, diverse, and inclusive cultures, right? And a question I'm really interested in is, why is it acceptable that equity, diversity, and inclusion is not a part of firm culture? But I digress. Okay, how do we get the leaders to engage? It's like so many other things. I think that we don't realize the power and influence that we as staff may have in an office. Let's take the COVID issue. Once we have reached some degree of herd immunity and everyone is expecting us to return to some degree of normalcy, how many of us truly believe that 100% of the workforce is coming back into the office? It's not going to happen. And the reason it won't happen is because people are demanding it, right? And so people are saying, I don't want to come back into the office. And when that many people in the workforce have said, I don't want to come back, leadership have to rethink things. Well, it's the same thing with getting leaders to become engaged with anything else, right? If the workforce isn't demanding it itself, then status quo will be the norm. But if we begin to create levels of expectation and requirements, not only for ourselves but for our workforce, for our environment, for our employer, I think that's the way we'll start to get some of the changes. Because like everything else, it's a hearts and mind issue. I mean, there's business reason, but everyone hasn't always bought into the business reason. But if that is someone's reason, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. Whatever it takes to get equity, diversity, and inclusion in a firm, I'm fine if your reason is because it fits a business strategy. I'm fine, that works. But it's also, but in addition to that, it's a matter of hearts and minds, right? You know, let's do what's right. And how do we get people to do what's right? We tell them we expect them to do what's right. And we have to stand by that statement, right? Which means if you're going to draw a line in the sand and say, I expect this and I demand this, then you have to be prepared to act in the event they don't coalesce. And that may mean you may have to leave. But I think that if we lay it down as an expectation, I think our leadership will have no choice but to follow.
You, Kevin, that was a great answer. I love that. You know, it's kind of sticking to your guns and demanding change.
That's right.
So in tandem with that and pushing forward, I guess I would ask, what can we do to push progress when you're not in a position of leadership? And I'm going to ask this to Lauren.
Yeah, so while I think having leadership buy-in is really important and obviously helps create that momentum for meaningful change, you can make a difference without it. Think about what you can do within your realm of power, right? What changes can you make for you individually or you and your team if you're leading a team of people? It all starts with you and like what you can do to really set an example that leaders want to follow. So don't wait for leaders to set the example for you, you set it for them. So think about yourself and gaining self-awareness about your blind spots and understanding your own unconscious biases. And if you really spend the time to grow yourself and listen and really hear what other people and what they're saying, what their different perspectives are, then you can start setting an example by being an ally for others. I've read several books over the last year, including Better Allies, How to Be an Anti-Racist, The Intentional Inclusionist, Playing Big, which is mainly geared towards women. And they've all given me personally a fresh perspective on racism and allyship and what diversity really means, and a lot more than just that. And by reading these books and having my own self-reflection, I feel like even though J.E.D.I is really important to our organization and it's embedded in our processes and all that we do, I've been able to know when I need to stand up for others, right? I know when I need to speak up and be the leader for our organization when it comes to different types of initiatives related to J.E.D.I. And if you can implement those best practices around it on your teams or within, like I said, your realm of power, creating a culture of inclusivity and belongingness and really listening and understanding, people will see your team doing something differently. They'll notice you. They'll recognize that your progress and success doesn't look like everybody else's, and they'll want to know why. You'll stand out and they'll say, hey, what are you doing differently? And they'll come ask you, and then you can be a leader for the other leaders and get them bought in by just setting an example through your actions.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I love that. Standing up for the right reasons, you know, I love that. And my next question, I would like to move this direction, the conversation to Mary Margaret. And I would like to ask you, you know, what outcomes and progress have you seen personally in your experience out in AIA, Minnesota?
Yeah, thanks for asking. You know, we began this work in earnest right when I joined the organization. It's part of why I was drawn to this position is because it was baked into the job description that EDI was going to be a priority for this next leader. And that was a good signal to me. And my very first board meeting was when the board adopted a diversity policy and the goal of having the profession and the people of AIA Minnesota reflect our broader population by the year 2035. So that gave me a mandate. I walked in already, you know, embracing this as a priority, but those two things together really allowed for big change to happen and quite quickly. But, you know, in the years that progressed between then and the murder of George Floyd, you know, it was 5 years of building a base of knowledge within our membership and building relationships, building a really strong relationship with BIPOC members of this architecture community, working with them to create a NOMA chapter, get it off the ground. And that work allowed us to respond quickly and well following the murder of George Floyd. So, you know, that really what I've seen is a shift here in Minnesota from questions about the business case or questions about what EDI means in the context of the profession of architecture, to now being, having people understand this as a priority. They understand the business case. The great majority are bought into that business case, but now it's about the how. And in particular, I think the state of the profession is really around what Kevin was mentioning about culture. It's about inclusion and how are you cultivating the conditions for the kind of culture that truly will not just work for everybody in some ways, but work for each person in the ways that they need it to work for them, right? That difference between tamping down all of our differences to the things that we hold in common, to be able to recognize what is unique about each of us and adapting toward those differences. That's the equity work. That's the justice work. So I think overall, we're poised to take those next steps, and we're trying to support our members in taking those next steps and shifting the culture. Oh, can I add in just one last thing? Sorry.
Yes.
The other thing that we are really starting to dig into is equity in the built environment. We've spent time in that space over these years leading up to the murder of George Floyd, but we've doubled down in that work and are doing more and more in that space, as are our members. And there's a lot of catch up to do in terms of our members' understanding of what equity means in the actual design process and in the outcomes of the built structures that y'all create. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, and that is very important. It's important for us to know that this work transcends past just the office space. It goes to our clients, to the contractors, everyone we come into contact with, even in our daily lives. So next question I want to ask this to Abby. So what are some barriers for getting resources out to firms and getting leadership to use them? And how can we combat these issues?
That's a great question. And I think, you know, thinking about that, I think there's a barrier. One of the biggest barriers really is fear, like this fear of change, or a fear of this perception of taking a political stance. And like in terms of a business case, like there could be a backlash to that, or a fear of doing things right and needing to be, you know, we're architects, we're perfectionists, like, and we're going to do something, we want to make sure we do it right. And this is when you're working on diversity and inclusion, like you're not done, right? Like it's an ongoing road, and you're going to screw up sometimes, and you're going to do things right. So you have to be ready as individuals and as a group to take accountability, to act humbly and take feedback and be able to say, I screwed up and I take responsibility for that, and I'm going to change and go forward, and how I react to that. I think, you know, kind of echoing what the other panelists have said, some of that is, you know, recognizing that, like, where our own agency is and our own spheres of influence, and where like that helps get over that barrier, instead of saying like, oh, I'm not the president of the company, I can't make a wholesale change. Well, it takes all of us acting all the time and being active participants in the process to actually make a change. And I think I often think about when you're in DC, like on the metro, there's a see something, say something, you know, like things like something's on the metro to report it. But that's the way that runs through my mind. If I see something, then I say something, you know, just sort of like, it doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't have to be combative. Just be like, even, you know, in a meeting, something comes up and you can just be like, wow, yeah, like, let's maybe not do that, everybody, you know, like just to reframe, just to kind of catch everybody and say, that's not right. Sometimes you make a bigger fuss, you know, stepping up in those meetings too, and supporting other people, being that ally, saying, you know, if somebody sounds like somebody else in the meeting is getting talked over, when it comes to you, you know, lift up their voice, be like, oh, you know, I really want to, you know, Sheila had a good point. I want to lift that up again, bring that back, and doing those sort of things in this sort of your ongoing process to help make it part of the culture of change. And it's frustrating, I think, for when you get fully into it, to feel like it does feel like it's not going fast enough, like too much time's passed already, right? Like we need to like get going on this, but also really just stay consistent and keep working. Like one of the things I do think about throughout whatever I'm doing is like center the work. Like what is the purpose here, and coming back to that, and just kind of keep pushing on it. Be like, this maybe today I don't feel like I made a lot of, we didn't make a lot of progress here, but you're laying a groundwork, and you keep saying it, and it becomes more of the culture, and the language becomes more acceptable. Even saying something like bringing up the words racism or white supremacy culture and those sort of things feel, especially in a corporate environment, can feel really, people get really nervous about that. They don't want to talk about that. So I think even just sort of making it part of like, even if it's the person like, oh, here she goes again, but eventually like that sort of helps bring it along, because it just becomes part, the language becomes more part of the conversation, and the conversations, you exercise those muscles. So it gets easier to keep having those conversations and move and take action to move the ball further down the road.
Hey, David, can I add that real quick? When Abby was talking, I was just thinking about something in our organization that is kind of similar, which is these definitions. Abby, you're saying these words like equity and racism, all these things. For us in our organization, one of the barriers was we had to get on the same page about what these terms meant, right? What does diversity mean to Thought Ensemble? What does belongingness, inclusivity, equity, inclusion, what does that mean to our organization, to each of us individually? Because by understanding what each of those terms means and getting on the same kind of playing field with that, it allowed us to have a better conversation around it. And for us, one of the things that we uncovered by having this definition conversation is people did not associate equity with fairness. They saw them as two different things. They felt that equity was being unfair. So we dove into that and really had a conversation around equity really is fairness. You're giving people an equal playing field, right? You're giving them what they need to be successful based on their own unique talents and skills and perspectives. But it took a lot of discussion around these terms for us to come to the root challenge of why we weren't in agreement around fairness and equity. So I think that that is also a barrier. If you can get on that same field and understand these terms together, it'll open up the door for much deeper conversations.
That's great. I know we didn't want to stay too long, but I just want to add one quick more thing on definition. Something that's helped me personally a ton is taking the word racist and changing it from, instead, don't think of it as a noun and think of it as an adjective, because I think there's so much people gets caught up in this, like, oh my God, someone called me a racist and I've done it, I'm running away and I don't want to do anything. If you change the word to an adjective and there was an action that was a racist action, that means I can change that action and make it anti-racist. I can do something different instead of this feeling like racist means like I'm running around in a white hood and I'm disposed of, you have to get rid of me. It's like, no, you did something, you're going to take accountability and you move forward from it. And I think that's like another thing too, that's the getting the definitions and on the same page is huge, and then moving everyone forward together.
Very well said, Abby and Lauren. And before we jump to our next topic real quick, I do want to jump back to Kevin and ask him, piggyback off of what Lauren and Abby were just saying, in your personal experience, Kevin, what importance of having firm leaders personally engaged in this work? What do you see? What importance do you see in that?
Thank you. Well, it's extremely important because it sets the tone, right? Whenever a firm leader leads something, then the firm's financial resources tend to follow, right? And then wherever the resources follow, then that means there's a commitment. And normally wherever there's a commitment, that becomes a part of the DNA. I think Abby made a great point when she referenced that "here they go again" statement, right? That happens when it's normally being led by a junior staff person, right? No one would dare say, here they go again. If the principal of the firm says, hey, this is what we're going to do, and that person can say it 100 times and no one will ever say, here they go again, right? So it shows you the importance, because you get one response depending upon if it's a junior person leading it, right? And in that case, that person normally doesn't have, and no disrespect to our emerging professionals, but that person doesn't have control over the firm's financial resources, right? And so it needs to be a firm leader who, one, sets the culture, and they do so by putting resources in place to make these things happen. Thanks for following up, Dave. Thank you.
Mary, do you want to say something real quick?
Yeah, I just wanted to plus one to Kevin on this. In that old adage, basically, show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value, right? So, if time and money is not going into this work in order to get to the place where it truly is integrated in the whole, then how much of a priority is it really?
That's right.
Thank you all, panelists. That was great. I love that. And I think moving forward, I think, Mike, do we have some poll results in?
We do.
All right.
So some folks came in a bit late and weren't able to access this poll, but based on who responded, I'll just read these so we have them for the transcript, even though hopefully you can see them as well. So joining us today, these are not the panelists, this is you, the audience. We've got 62% female, 38% male. We have 15% Asian, 8% Hispanic or Latino, 8% multi or biracial, 69% other, career stage, early career, 8%, mid-career manager, 46%, sole practitioner, 8%, principal and owner, 38%. So good distribution throughout a lot of these. How many years of experience do you have in architecture? We're starting from 6 to 10, that's 31% of you, 11 to 15, 46%, and then we go to 21 to 30 at 8% and 31 or more at 15%. So again, a broad range here on the audience today. So thanks for participating in that. Let's do another one before we move on, now that you've got that one out of the way. Brenda, we've got a question for folks about this topic specifically and where you are in your firm. Is it even something that's being talked about? So let's leave that up and move on to this next topic area.
Thank you, Mike. So we've gone into and we've talked about where do we currently stand with this issue and how do we get better and assess where our change is. So now we want to move into what are the resources that are available to us and how can we start to utilize those resources. So we want to shift the discussion to the resources available to firms, and specifically with the focus on how are they actionable. Let's make it clear that the goal of sharing resources is not just to compile a reading list to, say that I've, read such and such book throughout the year. I know about all this. You have the knowledge now. So how do we put that knowledge into action? So let's dive into it. So for the first question, I want to direct this to Mary Margaret. So what are the AIA guidelines for equitable practice? We've heard about these guidelines, but a few people might not know what exactly they are and how are they intended to be used. So can you speak more to that?
Sure, happy to. So Renee Cheng is the primary researcher who was contracted with AIA National to create these guides for equitable practice. She was with the University of Minnesota when that work started. And so I worked with her on this project sort of throughout. And she has since moved on to the University of Washington, where she is dean of the school there. But she has continued this work. And we've worked together on the Equity and Future of Architecture Committee at National. So I've been in the depths of her research. I can tell you that these guides are deeply researched. She's an extraordinary person and academic. And each chapter of these guides provides a baseline explanation of a topic that relates to EDI. It provides prompts and questions to jumpstart conversations and conversations at any level within an organization. There are also some real world examples and real world derived best practices. We were part of the group that put survey questions out to our membership to start bringing forward some of the stories of what people have actually experienced in architecture. And what I've heard from people who've dug into these guides is that those stories are really compelling to them. They really bring a lot of the concerns about the culture and operations of the profession to light. So I particularly encourage folks to pay attention to those stories. There are also specific tools referenced throughout the guides. And I should note the variety of topics here. So the first chapter focuses on intercultural competence, which is the ability to recognize and bridge toward difference in order to achieve a particular goal. So the goal might be to create an excellent outcome for your client. How are you able to bridge across difference to create that outcome? It could be, more micro in scale. How am I going to engage with this member of the community successfully in this conversation around this project that's happening in their neighborhood? So it can be micro scale, macro scale, but a core competency that it has become much more common to be recognized and talked about within the public and nonprofit sector in particular, but also growing to the private sector. So the guides start with that chapter as sort of a base skill and understanding that is encouraged. And then it moves on to different aspects of sort of the work of architecture, right? and working together. It's really about the people side, the management side of architecture. So other chapters include workplace culture, compensation, recruitment and retention, negotiation, mentorship and sponsorship, and career advancement. There's also a topic on engaging community, which really, again, sort of is the bridge between this internal work and working with members of the broader public on a project. And then the last chapter is focused on measuring progress. How do we know how we're doing? And the intention of these guides really is to get members thinking, a better way to put it, get them rethinking how they manage, how they lead, and how to do this work well. We know that most people in architecture have not really dug into the business side of what they do. They haven't had a lot of management training. It's not where they tend to spend their additional time, beyond the everyday work, is digging into, the latest in HR, right? So these guides really can create, it's a source for that education that you may not have received in school. And they can be the base for things like reviewing your employee handbook. I encourage folks to review the whole thing. It's massive once you print it all out, but give it a once over, not to remember all of it, but just to understand what's in there, so that when, for example, you are about to recruit for a new position, oh, that's right, that's in the guides. I'll go take a look at that section as we prepare to put this position posting together, send it out to networks, that type of thing. So to just start to reference it whenever you're taking a new step in your organization, or taking a step that's part of your annual process. You're gearing up for, annual performance reviews. What does the guide have to say about that? Right. And again, know that it is deeply researched, and that, even a couple of years after it was put out there, Renee went through and updated. So it's a really strong document that I just highly recommend that folks spend some time with.
Thank you so much, Mary. And that's very important. It's important for us to understand that a lot of people might look at these actions as put them solely on HR. And it's important to understand that we are in a service-based industry. So a lot of the work that we do transcends and goes past our personal desk. So we have to always keep that in mind and be working towards that. So moving forward, what are some other, and I'm going to pose this to all panelists, feel free, anyone can jump in on this. What are some other helpful justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion resources out there that people might not know about that you've come across in your experience?
I can talk about, David, I can talk about one of the tools that we just implemented actually at our organization. So one of the hardest things for us as a company is to eliminate our unconscious bias in the interview process. As much as we try, it's still there. Like, we're cognizant of it, we're aware of it, and it's just still there. So I'm constantly having conversations with interviewers about, okay, are you really taking a step back? Are you really doing the quantitative aspect that you need to be doing for your interviews? And we have robust scorecards, we've got all the things, but it's still there. So we actually found a tool called Interviewia. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not. Interviewia is a really awesome tool built by a minority based in Colorado. Joe Thurman is the owner of this company. He's amazing. And this tool allows you to put in your scorecards. They even have a bank of questions for you to ask, or you can create your own questions. And each question has to have a positive and negative indicator. So you have to be able to say, what am I looking for in this question from a positive perspective and from a negative perspective? So it can't just be a question. It has to have a purpose and intent behind it, right? And as I was setting up our scorecards that I thought were really good, I realized we had some questions I just didn't really have a point, right? So we cut those out. So we've just moved on to this tool. It gives you all kinds of data and analytics about your interviewers, the questions they're asking, the candidates themselves, what questions tend to be kind of like the fallout questions. Anyways, I'm finding this tool very helpful. And I feel like it's giving our candidates a more equitable interview process, a more equitable chance of getting a job with our organization, because it really focuses on that quantitative aspect and takes out the bias piece that the interviewers bring naturally to their interviews.
That's great. I will definitely be looking that up as soon as we get off of this call. Thank you for sharing. Abby, do you want to share a resource as well?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really worked well for us at Quin Evans is incorporating resources in like a multitude of different ways, like bringing it into the culture, like weaving it in different places. And it's exactly what Kevin and Mary Margaret were talking about like, where do you put the time and the money, right? Like, it's an organization, it's a business, right? So that's how you see how what's valued. So I think some of the different things we've done is, forming a J.E.D.I committee and giving those people that are on that committee, there's hours allotted to them every month that's what they're going to work on, and they can bill that time. We've had everything from different books that are diversity and inclusion in architecture. Some of the ones that we really worked, really hit home were Root Shock by Mindy Thompson Fullilove, which is about maintaining those communities and what happens it's really the culpability of architecture and urban design as a profession, and what we've done to communities historically and how we can kind of move forward from that. And also Mismatch, who I'm forgetting the name of the author right now, but I think it's on the list of resources everyone will get. And that's really talking about what does accessibility and inclusion mean in a space? How are we thinking about how our spaces work for all different people? And those were two great books. The other thing is really making sure you're having those conversations at all times. So the book club, it's not mandatory. You don't need to do that. You don't need to come to that discussion. But if you do go to that discussion, there's a place on your timesheet to bill for that time. So just gives it that, that's important. We care about this. This isn't just on your free time. We really care that you participate. But also when there's an all staff meeting, there's a check-in from the leader of the J.E.D.I group to say what's going on. So the same we get a check-in from marketing or any of the other initiatives in the office, we're talking about it then. We're having those conversations all together. And another great resource we did through the United Way. We did through the Southeast Michigan chapter. That's one we have an office in Detroit. But we did this 21-day equity challenge, which I was really impressed with the resources they pulled together. And it's actually a ton of information to try to get through in 21 days. But now we have that information to kind of come back to at other times. So I think that's the other thing, is remembering you don't have to start from scratch. People, this isn't new just because of the last year, right? Like diversity and inclusion didn't start because of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. This is like, we got 400 plus years of history here to deal with, right? So people have been thinking about this from different aspects and personal experience for a long time. So look for those resources and bring them in to really see how you can weave them in and really utilize those other voices and experiences in all parts of the business.
Well said, well said. All right, so for our next question, we want to ask, and I'll ask each panelist this question as well, but what are some examples of how local chapters or firms have successfully implemented the guides of equitable practice and or other resources that we have discussed or might not have discussed so far? So first I want to talk to Mary Margaret, and maybe you can speak a little bit to the guides of chapter on intercultural development.
Yeah, happy to. So as the guides were actually being developed, we were on a parallel track focusing on intercultural development as a theory of change. And so a lot of our work actually informed Renee's work on that chapter and vice versa. So it was a great time to have that chapter being pulled together. We started off by engaging a consultant to work with our whole staff team, which isn't that big. They're just 10 of us, but to work with the whole staff team in an 18-month engagement where we took a diagnostic tool called the J.E.D.I, the Intercultural Development Inventory, which gave us individually the sort of score and understanding of where we were as individuals in our intercultural competence, and a path forward. Again, an individual work plan to say, here's how you can grow to move along this continuum toward that skill and adapting toward others. And we got a team profile of where our team was at. And our team was in minimization with a little bit of leaning toward acceptance, which is further along that continuum. And so we spent a year following that diagnostic outcome, growing our understanding and our skills, understanding things like conflict styles and how conflict styles differ depending on the culture that you are raised within and the way the world views you, right? So at any rate, that 18-month engagement, after that, we took the diagnostic again, and our whole team profile moved along that continuum into acceptance, with some people in adaptation. So that experience of our team really gave us some confidence that this approach was one that we could bring to the membership. So we developed a program with these same consultants specifically for architects and designers. And, similarly, it was a multi-session approach, 9 sessions over the course of several months, multi-hours each. And we beta tested that program with AIA Seattle. And then just as we were entering the pandemic, we launched 2 programs, one called Foundations, that's really about getting as many people within the architecture community as possible to take that J.E.D.I, understand the intercultural development continuum, get their own personal work plan. And then the National Intercultural Leadership Program, which is that deeper dive of multiple sessions that's about really skill building. So we did the National Intercultural Leadership Program last year. 11 states participated, really fantastic outcomes. And we're getting ready to do it again. September 13th is when that will launch, and it will remain national in nature. So I can put that link in the chat a little later, but that was our progression, was to dive into this approach as a team first, experience that change, and then grow the number of folks engaged in that work. The other thing I would say is that our EDI committee really dug into the guides, taking them one chapter at a time. So each meeting would focus on a different chapter. And after they had gotten through all the chapters, they shifted to an approach where every other year would be focused on equity in the profession or equity in the built environment. And now we've spun off to a point where we've got a separate equity in the built environment committee. And we have another specific effort focused on culture change in the profession. And we've created a specific community of practice around creating that culture change. So we really did a deep dive in the first chapter, and that was the foundation for people understanding and activating the other chapters of the guides.
Thank you so much, Mary Margaret. So to add to that, in the second part, I want to ask Abby, what are some other successful programs that you've seen that's helped with this type of work in your own local chapters?
So I think another thing that's really been helpful is to how we examine how we're doing like internship programs and where are we recruiting from. So, and I think this happens to a lot of firms that like, we go back to our alma maters, right? Like, and so you end up with a firm that's like very sort of focused on one or two or three schools, the local school or the place where the, you know, the founding partners came from. And we really, over the last couple of years at Quin Evans, like took a step back and said like, you know what, let's look at a broader base. Like, let's make sure we're going out to more schools for recruiting for those summer interns. And that, you know, that changes to who you end up recruiting to come work at the office. So that was really a big step for us to really expand that base of who we're bringing in. I got a little ahead of myself before, but that United Way program was great as well for the whole staff. The other thing is like some focused programs and investments. I have a certificate from Cornell, an online certificate in diversity and inclusion management. So, which the firm supported me in getting. So that helps to just sort of bring more resources in. None of this stuff makes you an expert. Like I'm not, it's like, you know, we said before, like this is an ongoing thing, but it helps to have these places where you have this conversations and the language and sort of the kind of discipline to think through it. Like, how am I working in a way and how am I working through my biases to bring that back to the office as a whole and that culture to start changing that. And the folks on our J.E.D.I committee have also gone through a certificate program through the University of Florida. I think there was the same sort of thing. So doing those investments where it doesn't necessarily mean you need to invest in every person in the firm with that, but doing enough people that you bring them in and you can have that information come back and be shared throughout the firm and just start to become part of the culture of how you think and like making that investment, making that financial and time investment, just showing that this is important to the culture of the firm and just the culture at large. I think the other thing I didn't mention was just when you're thinking about all those places you're having the conversation, another thing we've done is invest in having these, moderated discussions that we call foundations discussions. That is mandatory for the whole firm that we go to. We have once a month and we're in smaller groups. It's not the entire firm together, but a cross group from our different offices. And we talk about different topics from, you know, to design and how the firm is for management and how we're doing that. And for all levels to have the discussion and kind of a cross levels across different offices so we can talk together. And one of those things, like our most recent discussion, is talking about design and why is empathy important in design. And I think it's like sort of weaving that in. That's not even like so overt kind of conversation, but also so important to all of this as well, that like you have to flex those muscles. Like empathy is important. The things that are important to us as that really make us good architects that sometimes you don't even sort of label in that way, but thinking back, like community has been one of the tenets of Quin Evans for always. Like we work in existing buildings and existing neighborhoods primarily. So how you build that community and how you affect the people around you is like a huge part of our cultural fabric. So just being able to like weave that over and say like, you're already doing this. Like that's also, I think, a really powerful thing is to sort of identify the places where you really are, like it really is something you're already doing, like, but you can do it more, you know, or you can flex those muscles more, or like say like, okay, how can I do this in, you know, what other ways can we do now that I've sort of identified it? How can I build on that?
Well said, well said. We have to flex those muscles. And I think, Mary, would you like to add to that a little bit before we move on?
Just very quickly, you know, I've been thinking a lot about this concept of empathy and how important it is to design. I also think that we need to recognize the limits of empathy and where representation really makes that difference, right? Empathy plus representation gets you so much closer to what that real lived experience is than empathy without it. So that's where, you know, to recognize the power of diversity in a team and a feeling of belonging within a team gets you further to that place of really being able to create resonant design solutions.
I love that. Representation all the way. I love that. And before we move on, we're running out of time for this topic, but before we move on, I want to ask Kevin, with a wealth of knowledge and experience under your belt, I want to ask you, do you have any successful examples of how do we activate these resources within a firm? Do you have any stories about that or experience?
Sure. Thank you. Very briefly. Here in Los Angeles, I'm the former operations director for Perkins & Will. And so in that role, the obvious staffing, resources, office management was part of my responsibility, but also human resources fell under operations. And so I will say, because my biggest resource is always people, right? And so I feel that if we hire the right person or the right resource, we'll have that resource within our staff. And the reason I bring that up is because along with our HR director at Perkins & Will, she and I were intentionally intent on being as diverse as we could be in our hiring practice. And so we decided we will obviously pull the area for all of the qualified candidates, but we were also looking to be as diverse as we could be. And so Perkins & Will Los Angeles in particular is a very diverse office. It's an extremely diverse office. Orientation, gender, race, ethnicity, I mean, you name it, Perkins & Will Los Angeles. Now, granted, we're in Los Angeles, right? And so there's just some cities that lend themselves to that. But we were also still intentional on trying to be diverse. And so if I can real quickly, I'd like to plug a few resources, because I don't have a whole lot of resources that I rely on other than people. But I mean, there's a few organizations, obviously NOMA, right? So let's go to some of the organizations that are representing groups that are currently underrepresented. So you have NOMA, you have Architectos in Chicago, you have the American Indian Council of Architects and Engineers. You have the Asian American Architects here in Los Angeles. So let's go to those groups that are currently being underrepresented, right? Because they are a great resource. They will provide anecdotal evidence beyond compare. And then another person who comes to mind is Dr. Kendall Nicholson, who's with ACSA. And he's their director of research. And I mean, he can provide all sorts of data, right? And so I think that part of what we need in terms of resource, and what I would look for a guide to give me, is data. I wouldn't necessarily look for a guide to give me programming, but I'd look for a guide to give me data, what needs to be addressed, and maybe some suggested ways of how to address it. But I mean, we know what the problems are, right? I mean, we've been reading anecdotally for years, right? I mean, you know, if you want to know how far back we have to go, let's go back past Frederick Douglass, right? You know, what does the 4th of July mean to the slave? I mean, it's there's so much anecdotal evidence that I don't know how much more research and how much more data we need to provide. The data's there if you want it, but I don't know how much more we need to provide. Let's just go on and implement.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for that. And thank you all panelists for a great discussion. That was great. So before we move on to our last topic of the noontime, Mike, do we have some poll results?
Yeah, so results of the last question are pretty stratified here. So the question on J.E.D.I being an issue discussed and addressed at firm leadership level where you're at, it was almost a 2-to-1 that yes, it is and no, it isn't. We did have a couple in the chats that said, no, it's not. So those numbers will be a little bit skewed and come closer to 50-50, but thanks for sharing that. And we're gratified that it is being addressed at so many places. Now, before moving on to the next topic, we got one more question for you. Has your firm implemented, not just talked about, the last question was talked about, has your firm implemented J.E.D.I efforts or policies, yes or no? So if that's coming up on your poll, which it will be if you're viewing us through Zoom, you'll see that. If not, you can add your answer in the chat if you're with us on Eventbrite. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. So for our last topic of the evening, a lot of our panelists have kind of hinted at it and said it in their answers in the other topics, but we really want to get down to how do we start to track and benchmark the progress that we're making. It's very important. I believe Mary Margaret spoke to it, Kevin spoke to it, Abby, Lauren, of it's very important to see yourself, progress, if, put this into other areas of life, when you're in the gym, it's really nice to see progression on your body, to see your physique change before your eyes. And that really gives you the motivation to keep going. So how do we implement that with, change and J.E.D.I and the resources that we have? How do we use those to start to track and motivate us to keep going and to get to those benchmarks? So let's get into it. So how do we track the progress? Lauren, can you maybe speak to a little bit of how do we begin to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very passionate about seeing results, right? It's one thing to talk about it. We can talk about it all day. But until you take action and really start showing progress, that's when the real impact happens, right? That's when the meaningful change occurs. And so last summer with George Floyd and all the press around diversity and equity, inclusion, and everything going on in the community, the business community, I was proud of companies for speaking up on social media, right? I'm proud of people for saying things and getting out there, but I want to be backed up by something meaningful. It can't just be what you're saying. It has to be backed up by action. And so I vowed that for our organization, we're going to be intentional and meaningful about what we're posting. And we're only going to post about it if we're actually doing it ourselves and can show the results of it. So that was kind of the stance we took on it. And with that being said, we were like, okay, well, now what are we going to do? How are we going to measure this? Because that's what this is all revolving around. So we created our own assessment through a lot of research and a lot of time. We built a complete J.E.D.I assessment for our organization that looks at all of our processes, our materials, all the way down to the vendors we select for t-shirts and hats, right? We went every single part of our organization, we just stripped it down and really started evaluating, do we have best practices around diversity, equity, inclusion? And we took it a step further and said uniqueness, belongingness. There's an A in there somewhere, I forgot what the word it is now. So we really stripped it down and looked at all these different aspects. So then for each of those, we gave ourselves a score and said, here's the score we are today, here's where we want to be. Then we developed an action plan. And these are actions that we can take in a short amount of time. So we listed out, we had probably 500 actions in the spreadsheet, which is not reasonable for us to take on in 1 year. So we prioritize them based on our DEI priorities and strategy for the year. And we said, what can we reasonably do each quarter? So we chunked out those actions into quarters and we assigned an accountability partner for each of those. And every quarter we report back to our entire organization about where we are. And each action has its own metrics tied to it. So if it's about recruiting, we said we are going to interview at least 3 diverse principals every quarter. Well, diverse to us means anybody who brings a different perspective. But then we also broke that out by race, by gender, by sexual orientation, so on and so forth. And we measured and held ourselves accountable to that. So for every action, we have metrics associated with it, and we report back to our entire organization. Then not only do we report back to our entire organization, but we are committed to reporting back to our customers or our clients as well. And we're also committed to reporting back to the CEO Action Coalition. So we signed a pledge to the CEO Action Coalition, which is an organization. If you are a business leader, if you are a principal, if you're an owner in your organization, you can go sign this pledge. They give you a ton of resources, but more importantly, they make you give them actions that you're doing, and they hold you accountable to showing progress towards those actions. So not only are you holding yourself accountable internally, but also externally. And I feel like this is really, really important because it also gives other people ideas of what they can be doing to make meaningful change as well. So I'll leave it at that. I could talk about this forever. I could show you spreadsheets and metrics out the wazoo and how we're tracking everything. And if you want to know more about it, you can send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm happy to drill down with this one-on-one with you. Again, I could spend all day on it, but having those metrics and identifying what's important to your organization will allow you to track progress and hold yourself accountable for it.
Yes. Moving on, I think, Mary Margaret, would you want to speak to maybe how you're tracking progress in Minnesota in a different area from where we are?
Sure. So we kicked off our efforts 6 years ago with a diversity task force report that showed graphics of the composition of the architecture community by race and gender, and the composition of the predominant feeder schools of architecture in Minnesota. And compared those with graphics showing the demographics of the state. So people really started to get an idea of, here are the gaps, here's what we're aiming for, here's how far we have to go. So this next year we will do that benchmarking, we'll do that again and see where we've made progress. Where we know that we've made progress in between is in areas of our own organization. Specifically, we set goals, for example, to shift the composition of the speakers at our conferences to reflect the demographics of Minnesota, as opposed to the demographics of the profession. And we met that goal a few years ago and have been able to sustain that over time. We also have seen a tremendous change in the composition of our AI Minnesota Board of Directors. It's a 20+ person board. We now have twice as many women serving on the board as we did back in 2015, 7 times the number of people of color. And to dig into that, 34% of our board is now people of color, and that's compared to 4% of the membership and 21% of the Minnesota population. So we're actually overrepresented in people of color on our board. And what's great about that is not just being able to check some box and give a statistic, but it means that there is a community where people are leading together and experiencing what it's like to get the benefits of diversity and inclusion in real life. The kinds of conversations that this board has are different than the kinds of conversations they're having in the rest of their work worlds, right? And to experience that means that they want more of that and are motivated to help create that in the firms that they represent and the organizations they're a part of. The other thing that I really recommend is pursuing the JUST label. We are nearing the end of our pursuit for JUST label here with AI Minnesota as an organization. It has been a great tool to have us dig into our own compensation data, dig into the demographics of our own team and our benefits. And it's prompted us to do engagement and inclusion surveys. And all of that, I'm so happy to say, like, tells us that we are on the right track, that you know, not just compared to where the architecture community is, but where other nonprofits and businesses that have done this pursuit, where they've ended up. And we set goals within just to say, we want to get to level 4. How do we get to level 4? And, you know, some of these are really hard, harder than others, but it's a really helpful tool. They have great supports that will work with your organization, you know, draft policies, all of it. But it's a great measurement tool, but also a great action tool. Oh, one last thing I wanted to mention. The other way to know where you're at is to just be in relationship with people. So, you know, I often will say that, you know, if I ask my spouse, who I've been with for, you know, 20 plus years, you know, how are we doing? And I give him a survey, you know, to do that. That's not going to necessarily go very well or tell me really what I want to know, right? If I'm in real relationship with him, I will know how that relationship was going, and we will have candid conversations, and he'll express concerns and criticisms and know that it's okay to do that because we are in authentic relationship with each other. And that's been a really powerful outcome of our work on EDI to this point, is the relationships we have, not just with the organization of NOMA, but the leaders of our NOMA chapter, means that we have, you know, a culture of candor with each other, and we do better work together. We're in it for the long haul, and we know it because we feel it. So.
Well said, well said. It's all about having that culture that can foster those relationships. If you don't, then you're missing the ball right there. So, so Abby, I want to ask you, what are some ways, how can we ensure benchmarking is done authentically, you know, and doesn't result in or come off as tokenism?
Yeah, that's really important. It gets to like what Mary Margaret said, like, it's not just about checking a box, but it's a change in culture. So I think first off, you know, it's important to look at the numbers, but also not get too caught up in them. Like, I'm a math person, I love numbers, but statistics is fuzzy math, right? Like you can tell whatever story you want with data when you start playing with it and looking at it in different ways. So I think be really rigorous in how you look at your numbers. Okay, so what's our percentage, but what's our percentage at each staff level of things? What's our percentage in leadership? You know, find your whole story. Like, you can use your data, but use your data to know the whole story. Next thing, exactly what Mary Margaret said, like, are you building relationships? Are you actually talking to people? Are you listening? Are you hearing what people are saying? Are you creating a space where you can have people can authentically be themselves? So are you putting people and mentoring folks so they can grow into leadership positions and take those positions and authentically be themselves, that they're not just there with no voice, that they actually have a say and some agency within your culture and your firm, to that their voice is being heard and they really are part of the conversation and they're part of that. I think one of probably the greatest benchmarks to look at if you're successful or not, what's your retention rate? Like, what does it look like? Who is getting to the management spots? Who's staying around? Who's leaving after within 5 years, 2 to 5 years or something? Who's left? Like, you have to look at that and say to yourselves, be really honest with yourselves. Okay, something's happening, you know, like there's a reason. There has to be a reason. Have exit interviews, or just take some step back and say, like, I'm not feeling, we need to do something different. We really need to be thinking about, we're not retaining the folks that we have some great people here and we lost them. So we got to figure out what we can do to change and do that. And I think the same, like Kevin said, about being really intentional about what you're doing with hiring, and then being intentional about who you're mentoring. I've said, you know, it's really easy for me to mentor a junior staff member who was basically me 10 years ago, right? Like if she's a young woman who's married, who just had a baby, and, you know, she's trying to figure out how to move forward, or, you know, like she looks just like me, and I know just what she was going through 10 years ago because I did that exact same thing. It takes more work for me to step up and say, how do I mentor the young Black man that's just graduated and coming in? Well, stretch myself, like I can do that and have a great relationship and help him move along as well. You know, like it takes a little bit more thought process on, you know, on the manager side or on that mentorship side, but there's a huge reward for everyone in that process, you know, to get us there.
Thank you so much, Abby. And I think everyone on this call can agree that, you know, people can lie, but numbers don't. So it's important to know that. And then before we end off this topic, I want to ask this question to all of the panelists. In your opinion, in your experience, what is the most important first step that we can take to make J.E.D.I a part of our firm culture and make lasting change in our firms and in our workforce? Kevin, you want to take it away first? Kevin, I think you're muted. There we go.
That was the catchphrase of 2020, right? I apologize for that. Thank you for that question. I think the first step is, we have to be honest with ourselves, right? We have to ask ourselves honest questions. And after asking ourselves the honest and hard and difficult question, we have to give ourselves an honest answer. Does my firm resemble equity, diversity, and inclusion, particularly that equity, diversity, and inclusion that has been dominating the conversation nationwide over the past 15 months since the senseless murder of George Floyd? And then ask yourself, if it does not, why is it not representative of this group? How am I causing it to not happen? What am I doing to make it happen, right? Those are hard questions because, and sometimes, if we're honest with ourselves, the answer doesn't put us in a good light sometimes, right? But that's what it's going to take. Unless we call out the problem and face it, we'll never answer it. And so I heard a few words, I heard a couple of terms today, and I would have loved at any point in my career to have worked with these three ladies. Any point in my career, right out of college, 5 years out of school, 10 years out of school, 20 years out of school. What I heard today was empathy and relationships, and those are two of my favorite terms, particularly in this space. And what I'll do is I'll leave you with a real quick anecdote. Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson was one of hundreds, if not thousands, of Negro League baseball players who were clamoring to get into Major League Baseball, right? So Jackie wasn't unique in that respect. There were hundreds of people lined up behind him who were waiting for the opportunity. The problem was in 1947, there was only one Branch Rickey. There were hundreds and thousands of baseball players who were qualified and ready to play Major League Baseball. And it was readily accepted that Jackie Robinson wasn't even the best from the Negro League, right? But the problem is there was only one Branch Rickey. And Branch Rickey went against the norm of Major League Baseball, absent a diversity program, right? Absent any type of support from any other owners, right? And he decided, I am going to integrate baseball and I am going to sign resources, right? Financial resources, financial commitment. I'm going to sign this young player to the Dodgers, and he won't stay in the minor leagues that long. We're going to bring him up to the majors relatively quickly. We need more Branch Rickeys.
Yes, we do. Does any of the other panelists maybe want to piggyback off of what Kevin said, or maybe share one of their own personal experiences? Mary?
Well, mine is nowhere near as eloquent and moving as what Kevin just ended with, but it dovetails. So what I had sort of thought about as in response to your question was really ask good questions. You can lead from anywhere within any group by asking a good question. And if you dig into the guides for equitable practice, dig into some of the other materials that this group has put forward, and come out of that with what are the questions that I'm going to start asking myself in growing my self-awareness and growing the self-awareness of the organization within which I work. So self-awareness at the individual and organizational level, again, prompting that through good questions, and just overall embracing the idea of rethinking. I just read a great book called Think Again, Adam Grant. I didn't put it on the list, but I'm going to promote it now. And it really is in this idea that if you're going to lead well, if your organization is going to do well in the years to come, you have to embrace the idea of rethinking regularly, growing that skill and that sensibility. So again, just a dovetail to the great things that Kevin just mentioned.
I'll say something. I think just again, building on all of that is that, yeah, like recognizing our part that we have to take action individually and keep taking action, that it like really is, you need to step up and own that personal responsibility and keep moving it forward. And I think in all aspects of your life, like that, especially as a white person, a cisgender heterosexual white woman, that like who, or for wherever you are, like take that responsibility and apply it in all aspects of your life. Don't walk away from it, and actually take action. Realize like where you have agency to do something and make those changes, make those moves, keep speaking up, keep advocating, keep, support folks, find other organizations where you can step in and, financially or otherwise provide your labor, your knowledge to somebody else who hasn't had the same opportunities as you, and really move it along. Because, if we're here, I think we're here most because we believe that this is important. We believe that change needs to happen. Then it's not going to happen unless we keep making noise and we keep taking action. Like it won't happen on its own.
I have nothing else to add, David. They all said it all, but all I was going to say before they all spoke was just engage in the conversation. Just be present, listen, learn, understand, and value other people's perspectives. That's all.
Well said, well said. Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you so much, Abby, Kevin, Mary Margaret. Those are such great answers. And I think a lot of our listeners here today will take so much of your words to heart and are ready to take action. So I think I'm going to give it to Mike. I'm sorry. And take it away with a summary and your thoughts of the conversation today.
Yeah, so we'll go back to that poll question on action and see those results. So we got 60% not yet. I don't want to call it no. We'll call it not yet. And 60% yes. So, or 40% yes, rather. And then before we go, we just want to do one more question, because we really want to know what some of those actions have been for those of you who have seen those take place in your firm. So if you could please share that with us in the poll that's up right now, that would be super helpful. And it's more resources that we can share as an organization with people who want to be on this journey. So just really terrific.
Excuse me real quick, Mike, your voice is kind of low, so you might just want to speak up just a little bit.
Okay. I'll project. This was a really engaging and energetic conversation. I was reminded of something that I keep seeing on the Olympics. Of course it's advertising, but there's a commercial that ends with, you don't have to be amazing to start, but you have to start to be amazing. And so, wherever you are on this trajectory, just get in the game. And I love all the analogies about using muscles and exercising. And are you doing workouts or are you training? Workouts are designed for you as an individual to get better at something. Training is, there's something on the calendar I'm working toward, or I'm going to measure myself against others who are also in this. So, nobody buys tickets to practice. People buy tickets to games. So get in the game, change your workouts to training. And then, my generation growing up, the phrase was be like Mike, but I think I need to change that to be like Branch Rickey. It's really interesting to me too, that the trajectory of inclusion and how that's been defined has changed over time to, it used to be, and for a very long time, inclusion was about fitting in. It was an individual's responsibility to the group to reflect the group. And then that pendulum swung way back the other direction, right? And then it turned into celebrating difference. But it was still an individual-based dynamic, right? So you as an individual got to do whatever you wanted, and the group then had to subjugate themselves to that. There was still a disconnect. It went from one side of the coin to the other. I think where it's going now is to cultivating belonging, to where everyone, regardless of what they bring to the table is an equal shareholder in the outcome. And because it is a more diverse and robust team that's contributing to the outcome, it's going to have better results. So I'm curious to see where that trajectory of inclusion goes in the future. And then it is, of course, instead of it being a singular effort, it's a team effort. You know, the old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go farther, go together. You know, there's a reason why, as I'm sorry to bring up the analogy again, you know, relay result times are faster than individual times. That's because each of those people are really good at what they do, especially those medleys where it's all different kinds of events stacked together. That's how we need to think of this within the teams that are working on it, is bring people who are really good at one thing and put them together so they know how to pass the baton and work as a team. And finally, Mary Margaret reminded me that culture and cultivation comes from the same genesis. You know, they're not two separate things. It's alive, it's active, it's growing, and it takes an environment that supports that growth to keep it going, or it will die. So just some things to think about in moving forward. I'm kind of summarizing and rephrasing what I've heard today. And only one more thing, Kevin, I'll push back a little bit on the "there they go again" phrase, where you said, you know, if principals say that, they can say it 100 times and nobody will question them. They will if it's words and not action. So,
Excellent.
I mean,
Point taken.
That, but you know, I have to say it just to get it out there. So here's step one, DTR. And for those who are commitment phobic, that's not define the relationship, it's define the root. When we say this word, we mean this by it. So having clear and agreed upon definitions of the terms that we're going to work on. I love this idea of assigning a project number to this effort. That keeps it on the docket as billable time that's okay to use for whoever wants to contribute to it. It lets you build teams within your practice to contribute to it. It keeps it on the balance sheet and lets you establish a dashboard to know how you're doing. If you haven't done implicit bias training, it's probably a good idea. What implicit bias training does when it's done well is it creates an equal playing field and says, there aren't heroes and villains here. Everyone has a way that they are wired and the way they see the world. And we just need to be aware of how that impacts how we interact with other people. So if you haven't done that yet in your company, it's probably a good idea to ask when it's going to happen. Don't say, I want to see this now or I quit. Just ask when it's going to happen with the assumption that it will take place at some point if it hasn't already. And that one has to be 100% attendance, especially from the owners and principals. They have to be in the room at the same time. And it can't be two conversations where we have one with the management, one with everybody else. It's one conversation, everybody in the room. The Guides to Equitable Practice, of course, have been mentioned a lot, but if you haven't looked into this yet, consider starting a cohort within your company or even among several firms that are interested in going through it on a calendar progression and make that by invitation. That's not an obligation that we all have to do this. That's just an invitation to get the conversation started. I think where you go from there is you do a judgment-free gap analysis. Again, you're just looking at where the Equitable Practice Guides say you need to be and measuring it's where you are. And again, the judgment-free part is important because it's not about pointing fingers or laying blame. It's about setting a goal and an aspiration. And then you have to assign ownership of that gap analysis to someone. It could be a management committee, it could be an internal EDI committee. And then you have to open it up. Once the gap analysis is complete, you have to let people gut check those results. Does this seem right to you? Has the analysis we've done match up with what you're experiencing in this company? Then create an EDI action plan tailored to your company. Perkins & Will is first out of the gate, and they did a great job with it and made it open source. So there's a lot of templates and resources out there to use. And again, it's about making it what fits for you. It doesn't have to be, if you're a large firm, don't do a small firm one. If you're a small firm, don't do a large firm one. Then this is really important. Celebrate milestones and recalibrate. If you're not having fun along the journey, then people are going to lose momentum and energy along the way. But you're never done. That's the recalibration part. If it took you shorter to get to a goal that you realized, say, that's great, but maybe our goal wasn't big enough. How can we go the next extra mile on that one? And then finally share with with people what you're doing. We have a great resource page through our EDI group. It's one of our most vibrant committees at AIA Colorado. And for the 40% of you who are already doing this and the 60% who are soon to join them, please share it with them so we can have a resource and an open source compendium of actions and steps and plans and celebrations and milestones that everybody can take part in and feel proud of. So those are some of my recaps. I hope I did justice to everybody's words today. Let's get to some questions here. But before the audience questions and conversation that we can close with, Brenda, let's see some of those results from the last poll. So hopefully on your screen, you're seeing that 29% have established a J.E.D.I committee or employee resource group within their firm. That we've got 14% have done implicit bias or cultural competency training. 43% have plans focusing on recruiting, developing, and retaining diverse teams. 14% support participation in organizations committed to advancing J.E.D.I, like NOMA, Equity by Design, Women in Architecture. So those are some good things already happening. Thanks for sharing those. The first question I want to get to is one that's been sitting out here for a while, where Kristen asks, can any of you speak to taking out bias in employee reviews, growth, and opportunities with a firm? For example, writing out descriptions for positions so people know the benchmarks they need to meet, making leadership opportunities available to people even if they don't work 40 hours a week, etc. Too often I see ownership opportunities only given to people who look like the principals or designers that are only male and so on. I'm gonna start with Lauren on this one, but first an editorial comment. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that because the profession today and the workforce in architecture today is so overwhelmingly white and male, the odds are better for those folks. So don't hold it against the people who hired or the person who gets hired because they might fit that profile. The pool today is not what we want it to be in the future. But back to the earlier parts of that question that was asked, how do we take bias out of employee reviews, growth, and interviews so that we're not just dealing with a numbers game and percentages and odds?
That's a great question. So for us, we spent a lot of time looking at our performance review process and trying to make it as equitable as possible. And what we've resulted in is we actually do our review process every quarter. So we don't do 6 months or annual reviews anymore. We do a quarterly review process. That quarterly review process allows us to stay on top of it, but we also expect everyone to give real-time feedback. So nothing in those reviews is a surprise, right? You're getting that feedback real-time throughout the quarter. We also built a scorecard that is very descriptive in what we're looking for. So you can't really use your biases. You have to look at it like how the person's actually performing. And since we're all remote, my company's all remote, so none of us are in person. So there's no, this person came to the office today and this person didn't. We're all remote. We all sit behind a desk at our home offices. So for us, it's even more important to create this performance process that's visible for everybody because you're not seeing that person every day. So our scorecard's published for all employees to see. Anyone can look at it. They can't see the scores of everybody, of course, but they can at least see what's in the scorecard. And we don't gear it towards one specific skill set. We kind of have general skill sets that we look at, and then we quantify those in a way where you can put a plus, plus, minus, minus next to that person's name, and then create a description around it. So we've been doing this for a couple of years now, and we keep tweaking it every once in a while. We'll add a new thing in or take something out that doesn't make sense. But for us, this has been the best way to show progress towards performance issues, show when someone's meeting expectations or exceeding expectations. It also allows us to promote off cycle. So instead of waiting for 6 months or annual reviews, we can promote mid-quarter because I know as the head of people operations how everyone's performing. And if I'm like, hey, Catherine's been performing above level for 3 weeks consistently, let's go ahead and promote her even though we haven't had a review session yet. And I'll call spontaneous meetings and we'll do that regularly to promote people off cycle. It also allows us to catch performance issues as well and address them quicker rather than waiting until they're so far down the road that we can't come back from it. So that has really helped. We also give all of our employees a professional development stipend of $5,000 to use towards any sort of professional education that they want that enhances their career and is aligned to our business. So some people are using that to get personal coaches. Some are using that to get deep dive into like M&A, merger and acquisition training or change management training or whatever it is they want to do, right? So we're trying to find ways to create this stepping stool that's equitable for all of our employees, and they're all evaluated consistently that makes sense for their role and position, and more regularly as well.
That's fantastic. So for people who don't work for Lauren's company, you can either send her an email and ask when she's hiring, or you can hear from Mary Margaret about how you can bring some of the tools and resources in the Guides to Equitable Practices to your firms. You want to tell people where they can find that and some of those things that address the question?
Yeah, there are a few things that I'm pretty sure are reflected in the guides, but they talk about affinity bias. A lot of what I heard in the question that was posed actually relates to affinity bias, which is lifting up or supporting people who we perceive to be like us. And, you know, in reviews, there's certain kinds of bias that show up. So for example, women tend to be more evaluated on their personality and what they've done in the past, and men tend to be evaluated for their potential. So one of the things that you can do is actually, as an organization, look through past evaluations, documented evaluations, to see if those patterns are showing up for you. Bring some light to that issue and have it be a prompt, something that you're cognizant of about when you're actually writing a review, and then have a step in between where it's not just directly the supervisor to the employee, but there's someone who's reviewing, you know, evaluations overall who can say, this leans really heavily in how this person's personality is perceived. Let's shift this balance and let's talk about what they've done and what their potential is, right? Other things we know is that women and people of color tend to be penalized for exhibiting any sort of anger, and men tend to be rewarded, which sounds bizarre, but the research proves that out. So how is that potentially showing up? And can you kind of get ahead of that and intervene? The other thing here is prioritizing management. You know, a lot of people in architecture hold multiple roles. They are architects and managers of people. And my understanding from when those guides are put together is often the management side of those things tends to fall away, especially if they're an extraordinary performer in what's thought of as the work of architecture, right? To recognize management of people as actually being, you know, the work of architecture as well, and hold people accountable for their impact on the culture, right? Not just on the bottom line of the organization. It's often the people who are the, you know, mini starchitects, right, in your own geography or within your firm, who bring in dollars, who are great at business development, but they can also be people who are having a negative impact on the culture. So, you know, if you're explicit about what you're going to be evaluating for, transparent about it, like Lauren was talking about, that also helps people understand what they're aiming for and how they're going to be evaluated and how they're going to get promoted. Often people don't know what it takes to get promoted because they're never told and management has never articulated it. So the more you can articulate it and make it known and shine a light on it, the more equitable your processes are going to be.
And the sourcing of it from those guides that are a national resource has an underlying message that says to whoever you're bringing it to that if we don't do this and it's a national resource, our competitors will. So kudos to your group for bringing that to the forefront and making it a national model. Kevin, you've put together and managed an entire office for a large firm. I'm sure you have some thoughts on this question too.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. I think Mary Margaret just hit on a great point. Qualifications for promotion tends to be a mystery everywhere, right? I mean, you know, people are saying, hey, I did this, so shouldn't I be promoted to associate or senior associate or associate principal? And, you know, it's not always concrete. So it's sort of always a moving target. That threw me. but when I was at Perkins and Will, I've actually started my own practice. But when I was at Perkins and Will, we got rid of the term employee reviews. We got rid of that, and we had a program that we called Thrive. And what Thrive was it was emerging professionals reporting or reviewing with their immediate supervisor, whether it was a project architect, whether it was a project manager. That person then had to take that conversation to someone in leadership. They had to take the conversation to someone in leadership and explain what's going on with this person's performance, or why this person is worthy of a promotion, what this person has done well, what this person needs work with. We then would take that person in leadership within a leadership meeting, had to serve as the advocate for that particular staff person. In that room with the other leaders, this leader had to serve as the advocate. So while this person was being presented to everyone, the advocate had to sort of defend them, because there's enough people in here who can find something wrong, right? But someone in the room has to find a way to defend them. And so questions were asked, okay, so what's this person's potential? What is this person in the wrong position? Is it a good person, but they're just in the wrong job, right? What opportunities have they had, right? So before we start to assess everyone, let's make sure they've had every opportunity to be successful. Let's make sure they're doing the right, we have the right tool for the right task, right? If this person is a screwdriver, right, you don't want them trying to loosen lug nuts, right? So let's put the right person in the right place. And so we were able to have some good conversations in the leadership room about individual staff, and I think that's healthy, because it takes a decision out of one person's hands, right? If everyone gets to chime in, and if you have a bias, and all of us have biases, but if you have a bias towards someone, some of those questions are going to pull it out. And at least it gives us the opportunity to say, okay, I understand what this is about. You're still just a little upset over something that this person said. And you have reason to be upset, but that's not a reason not to promote this person, or whatever the case may be. But I mean, we had a mechanism, still needs to be worked on, right? Everything, there's room for improvement with everything, but I think it was a pretty good method.
Yes, what I'm hearing there is, one person absent anything in writing can be extremely subjective.
That's right.
Demoralizing, but multiple people with some guidance can be objective and encouraging.
That's right. And everyone who worked with this person, whether they were in that conversation or not, everyone in the room who has worked with that person was given the opportunity to say, well, I worked with them on this and they did this. I worked with them on that. Well, they weren't as good as they were on the other project. But I mean, at least you start to get a total picture.
Yeah, and thank goodness for that, because we're more than one-dimensional.
That's right.
Well, we are past time, and it's flown by so quickly. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your insight. We could keep going, but people have other things to do, and we will keep going on another in this series coming up next month from the J.E.D.I committee. Abby, Lauren, Kevin, Mary Margaret, fantastic job as panelists. As expected, you delivered. And David, well done as our host and moderator today. Kudos to you as well. So as we wrap up, I want to thank the panel again for providing the webinar, and Noma, Colorado for agreeing to co-present it with us. And of course, none of this would have happened without the AIA Colorado J.E.D.I committee, who has put all of these sessions together. This is number 2 of 3 for this year. They've compiled a list of resources and will deliver it to your inbox later today. Coming up, we've got the Design and Award Celebration on September 16th, where we're going to celebrate the best of all that AIA Colorado has to offer through our projects and service. And then we're also looking forward to one more in this series, continuing conversation about J.E.D.I, our virtual connects, which happen most every Wednesday, and our annual conference on practice and design coming up October 6th, 7, and 8. You all are invited, of course, as well. So thanks everybody for making time in your schedule to learn more about this, and we look forward to hearing how you are advancing this important issue. Have a great rest of the week. Take care.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.